Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Cheeky Natives. Today we have a very exciting guest all the way from the UK, and because of the wonders of technology, we are able to have a conversation in real time even though he is 8 hours ahead. Today we have the author of a collection of poetry. His name is Tapiwa Mugabe. The collection that we'll be talking about today is Zimbabwe. Hi Tapiwa, how are you?
Hey, what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. I'm alright.
How are things going on across the Pacific?
It's alright. Cold because it's just nearing towards the end of winter, so it's a bit chilly over here. But everything else is good. Everything else is great. How you doing?
I'm doing well. LA's winters are not as cold as like New York or the UK. So things are fairly cold, but not as cold as I
It's
imagine
great to
you are.
hear. It's good to hear.
Yeah, no, so it's quite like a warm winter situation, but it's still really cold. So I've read Zimbabwe a number of times because I think of how important and like important themes that you discuss in Zimbabwe. But I wanted to know why the title Zimbabwe.
Um, it was a sentimental title. Um, but more than just being a sentimental title, that sentiment came from Zimbabwe being home, the country of my, and so it was just the idea of making my first work, my first piece of work, my first book, titled the country from where I came from.
And I guess a lot of our listeners and a lot of our readers a lot of the people who've read your book would like to know who Tapiwa is. Like, when people ask you outside of being the author of Zimbabwe, who is Tapiwa?
Oh God, I hate and love that question. I'm a myriad of things. So it depends with who I am. I know who I am for myself, but I'm a brother to my sisters. I'm a son to my mother, a son to my father. I'm a friend to many people, and for myself, I guess I'm just a human being trying to figure out things, trying to figure out what this experience is, and trying to enjoy it as much as I can.
I hear
If
you.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose my question is, you're now based in the UK, but your birth country is Zimbabwe. Like, when did you leave Zimbabwe to settle in the UK? And how has that experience been like?
Gosh, how long have I been here for? I came just when I was a teenager. I can't remember how old I was. Maybe around 15, 14. And it was moving over to make this home. So in many ways, it's been like home. You know, a home away from home, like I say in one of my poems. But it's very much become home. It's very much I've embraced the place, and in a way, maybe it has embraced me as well.
No, I hear you. I hear you. I think there are quite a number of things that you speak about in Zimbabwe, but one of the first things that I'd like us to talk about, and before we speak about that, is it possible to recite the first poem in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, sure, sure. Man,
Yes.
yeah, sure. I used to make a, I, sorry, I used to make apologies for having the soft in my man, a wave of woman in my masculinity. I was called too gentle and too unmanly for not holding women in my waist. Today, I wear my mother in my voice. I am clothed in her. I wear my sisters in my thinking, my grandmother in my bone, in my soul. I am, after all, my grandmother's child, for she prayed for me. It was she who went before God, red war paint on her face from fighting the men. She pleaded for her son. How then can I deny the woman in me when my coming to earth was because women prayed for me? Was I not made from a woman's mouth? Only father remarks at my petal nature. The women I come from say I am beautiful.
I mean, the poem, I think, for me is laced with a lot. It speaks about, like masculinity, and having grown up in like an African society, I know how, tradition or toxic ideas of masculinity can be laced under the traditions. Do you find that, before you moved to the UK and growing up in the family that you grew up in, that was your experience, that masculinity was sort of lauded and a certain type of masculinity was lauded?
Yeah, definitely. I think it definitely came from memories, and obviously, like my memories are made up of my experiences. So it definitely was what I had experienced up to the point that I actually wrote that poem. And I actually think I wrote that poem way younger than like years ago, and I was quite young when I wrote that poem. And when I say write, it's not exactly those words, but I knew what that feeling was of knowing that this kind of treatment that I'm getting is because I'm a man. So I was treated differently to the female members in my community, and I was definitely very much aware of that, and I wasn't comfortable with it. And then just more than that, it did come from the way that I was treated, and like you said, the expectation that was put upon me, just because I identify as a male member of society. There were certain things that were expected of me, which I definitely found limited my experience as a human being, and I wasn't happy with that, or I wasn't comfortable with that. So when I wrote this poem, it was kind of an expression of those ideas or expression of those experiences.
And do you think that it's in some ways the society that you grew up in has constructed the way that you view your own masculinity? Do you think that the one question is, what is your idea of what society views masculinity, and how has those ideas affected how you view your own masculinity?
I think leading up to, I'd say maybe around about the time that I wrote the poem, and being able to share that poem with the people that I was around at the time, and the people that I interacted with, and realizing that we were kind of entering a new age where the idea of masculinity that I had been given from the time I was born was pretty much flawed. And realizing that from that moment in time, it was almost like a eureka moment of realizing that, oh, okay, so the person that I've been all my life there's no wrong or right to being that person. And therefore, it was kind of like, okay, so the masculinity that I defined for myself is the right kind of masculinity. And then this other kind of masculinity that the world was telling me to be, that the world was defining for me, which, like you said earlier, was pretty much toxic. I found myself pretty much being able to reject it and say, okay, I don't like this part of it, which I thought was filled with dangerous ideas of what a man should be.
And do you find that having rejected this visceral toxic masculinity, that there is pushback against like your own masculinity? So how people construct you is because you've rejected what they perceive to be manly, that there are some form of like slurs that there would be, like you are now becoming more feminine, or you're queer, which obviously in the construction of masculinity as we understand it in African context is that like queerness is not a form of masculinity, so it's like unmanly for you to be queer. Do you find that you find yourself being questioned about like where your manhood lies because you've rejected these ideas?
Funny enough, you said that, which is where, like, for example, the line in my poem about being too unmanly, being called too unmanly and too gentle for not holding women in my waist. Funny enough, that came from the position of people questioning, like you said, questioning perhaps maybe my sexuality, because of having grown up in an environment where I was surrounded by women. My initial idea of being around women wasn't always to view them as sexual objects, if that makes sense. So I found myself being, like you said, being called slurs. From a time when I was a teenager. I was pretty young when people used to say things to me. But to me, I knew that what they're saying is only because they misunderstand me.
Mm.
I had known this from quite a young age, that, this is the way men behave, and this is what's expected of men, and I chose to behave in a different way. So, I definitely was, I definitely did go through a period where people thought calling me slurs or attacking my sense of masculinity was to some extent demeaning towards me, but it wasn't. It wasn't surprising after a certain time.
I mean, also this raises an interesting question about, do you think in the same way that it also creates the impression of you not necessarily becoming someone that they said you would become? So, like, if, for example, I mean, in my experience, like, I have, also grown up, like, with racial slurs because, what society would define me as an effeminate man. And in some ways, like, before I fully started, like, accepting my identity as a queer body, I found that I was rejecting it because I didn't want them to be right. And do you think that sometimes people who may be queer find that they don't want to accept that identity because they don't want people to be right about them being unmanly?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think that is a possibility, and I think that is definitely something that does happen in the society that we live in, because it doesn't accept us for who we say we are, and it doesn't embrace. Unfortunately, we live in a society where we're not embraced for the definitions that we impose upon ourselves. Society always wants to be the one telling us who we should be and how we should be, whatever we see ourselves as. So yeah, that definitely does happen.
Yeah. I mean, also what's important is about when you write this poem, man, you'd speak primarily about the women in your life, right? You speak about today I wear my grandmother, and today I wear my mother in my voice. I wear my sister in my thinking and my grandmother in my bone, in my soul. Do you want to tell me about the relationships that you have with the women in your life, and particularly the woman who you mentioned in this poem? So your mom, your sister, and your grandmother.
Initially they were the first women in my life, and I've got like really special bonds with all three of them. My grandma's passed away now, but she was. This is like part of showing our culture, but because I'm the son in my family, and she's my mom's mom, so she always used to call me her husband. So to me, she's always going to be. I always saw as my love, and with my mom, I mean, like my mom is that's mom. And then with my sisters were my first friends. So my first so I've always had a closeness to society in general. Having a male child is seen as perhaps more important than having a female child. So that was definitely true, like in my family. And so my mother was kind of under pressure to have a male child, and my grandmother kind of took it upon herself to pray for me, to pray for my mother to have a male child, and she felt that her prayers were answered when I was born. So that definitely is like another reason why I keep her like in my heart, and she has a special place in my heart. And then with my sisters, like I said, they were my first friends. So before I ever knew that they were girls, they were like these special human beings that I had in my life, and we played together. And when we played, there wasn't any separation of sexes in the games that we played or in things that we did. My sisters were the first people to teach me how to rap. My sisters were the first people to teach me how to dance. They were the first people I played football with. They were the first people who taught me how to play basketball. It was one of my sisters who put me onto cricket, who put this love for cricket in me. It was one of my sisters who taught me how to write or who read me books. So it wasn't like I saw them as girls and girls are supposed to do these kind of things, or girls aren't supposed to do these kinds of things. They were the coolest people I ever met in my life, and they still are, So I had like really special relationships with my sisters, and I still do.
That's good. Like I enjoy, the type of relationships that you're talking about, because your grandmother still appears as this like warrior who believes in the power of prayer, and your mom, is a mother, and your sisters are like really your ride or die, And the last, towards the end of the poem, you also speak about like only father remarks at my petal nature. The woman I come from say I'm beautiful. What is the relationship like with your father?
I mean, it's a beautiful relationship. We have a beautiful relationship, and it was just, I suppose that was a part of me being snidey towards him, because it is something that he said after having a phone conversation with him a few years ago when I was younger, and maybe I did like harbor some type of feeling about what he said to me, but it was just it also came from a place of almost just it came from memory, and it's memory of what expectations he had, what expectations other older male members of my family had of what a man should be. And when it came to those expectations, I was pretty much rebellious, like to the point of a rebel, like I was a rebel with the cause, like I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to prove your ideas of what a man should be are wrong. I'm going to be this soft, beautiful man, and I'm still going to be more of a man than you are. So that was kind of like my ideology in that line. It was saying I have this soft petal nature, but I'm still this beautiful man, and beautiful in every way that you can think of. I'm beautiful in terms of being excellent, and excellent to being like something, be excellent to being excellent at everything that I do. So it doesn't matter whether I'm studying in class. It doesn't matter whether I'm doing some physical activity. It doesn't matter whether it's a physical activity or a mental activity. It doesn't matter whether it's about my character or my attitude or my behavior. I am going to do it in the best way possible and still call myself a man.
And I think a man sort of can be read in tandem with she wrote poetry. Because in She Wrote Poetry, you say she wrote poetry that made you want to sit on a heavily shaded lawn with a cup of sweet tea. But I like this phase where you say, oh yes, and it says it, and read it in front of your father and his brother, who believe boys should never wet their hands in the kitchen sink washing dishes or bending sweeping floors, men who father their children afraid to be friends with their sons. She wrote poetry that healed all of you, even the parts of you that were hidden, and the shadows, because you were not manly enough for your father. And then also you go on further to say you learned it was human and not womanly to cry. Again, I think it speaks about just these ideas, and I find that a lot of your commentary on masculinity in Zimbabwe has to do a lot with softness. What is your relationship to softness and masculinity?
What is my relationship with softness? I mean, like I said, masculinity was definitely this thing that I was given by my culture and my heritage and society of this is how you should be. And then having said that, because I'm the only male child in my family, so it was kind of hard to take on those ideas. And then the only place that I would see what it's like to be a man was from my father and my uncles, and like I said, so with the softness bit, I definitely feel like I got the softness from my mother, even though years now I can sit back and think, oh shit, there's definitely some aspect of softness to my dad. So I guess I get it from both of them, but it's just realizing that in part as men in society, we are soft, and there's a pressure on us to hide our softness. And I suppose that is what my dad was doing. He was hiding his softness and only showing that softness in almost like in a very controlled way, you know. So I think that is what we end up doing as men in not just in Zimbabwean society or in Zimbabwean culture, but I think in the world as a whole. But like I said before, I think it's changing, you know, because I think like it's the spirit of the times now to realize that it's part of the spirit of the times now, and men are realizing that we're human beings, you know. We're not just one thing. We've got both the X and the Y chromosome. We've got both sides of our parents, and we're human beings and we're emotional creatures, and we express ourselves through our emotions, and we feel our environment through our emotions. So our emotions are very important to us, and it's just unfortunate that the other side of the spectrum of emotions that we have, or one side of the spectrum of emotions that we have, has been called soft and weak, you know. And yet there isn't any right or wrong to your emotions. There's no strong or there's no weak. They're all just the same emotions. They're an expression of something that you're feeling inside. They're an expression of your thoughts, of your ideas, of your memories. It's just the stirrings of something internal that you express outwardly.
And I want to know, because some of the poems that you write about in Zimbabwe, you speak a lot about love, and you speak about like different facets of love. Do you think that the way that you've now constructed your masculinity for yourself, right, has infiltrated into the way you are in relations with other people, particularly romantic relationships?
Oh yeah, definitely. It definitely has. Because you then realize that, okay, however you identify yourself, and for myself, as a human being who it then empowers me to be able to express my love, or to be able to be romantic in a myriad of ways, you know. Whereas before, or maybe if you're subscribing to certain ideas of masculinity, you feel like you can't express you can't be romantic in certain ways. It's like all of those ideas have been shattered. I can be romantic in every way that I decide to, because I'm defining for myself what way to express how I feel inside, what love I have for another person.
And I mean, you also speak a lot about like fatherhood, outside of your father, and like how you would like to teach your children how to be different, different children, I guess, creating and giving them a space to be who they want to be. Do you think that that also comes from the way that your parents raised you?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely does. It's something that I was given by both my mom and my dad, and my grandmothers and my grandfathers, to be able to be yourself as much as you can, and in however way possible. And even though I can look back and criticize quite heavily the male side of my family and say, you could have given me this, you could have taught me this, or you could have tried to not be so like your ideas of masculinity could have been toned down. In the end, however they treated me, I've been able to look at it and say, okay, there's bad experiences and there's good experiences. What am I going to take from each side, and what do I want for myself as a parent one day? How do I want my children to be?
And I mean,
and how do I to bring them up? Sorry.
no. So I'm just saying, like in keeping with that, is it possible to read the poem as a father?
Yeah, sure. Let me just turn the pages to it. I can find it.
I think it's on page 26.
Yeah, I've got it. As a father, I'll remember to teach my sons the soft. I'll remember to teach my children how to speak the mother-child language they spoke in the womb, twice as often as they learn muscles and bruteness make a man. I've seen how cruel and heavy a man's hands get when he grows surrounded by brooding ego that celebrates fists and booming voices when there are no brains or compassion. There will be no sticks, only hands overflowing with love. I will show my daughters how not to cut themselves down. They will have their tongues, own their bodies. Their minds will be valued. My daughters will be heard. A son is not a lion or a jewel. He is a child who is as precious as a daughter. I'll pour their mother's history into her womb and rub their minds with our grandmother's songs. I will teach my children how to farm compassion and harvest love. For every lesson they get about philosophy, economics, and science, I will teach my children how to plant a mountain. I will teach them how to build a fire in the heart of a tree so that its fruits are alight.
That's deeply profound. It's just like, I guess, the essence of it is to teach your children to be children, and that there is no equality. But what happens in instances where, like, you and the woman that you marry and the woman that you have children with, like, have different ideas about softness and about masculinity? What happens in those regards? Like, say you are all about people being soft, but she may be about, no, because society is so cruel to soft men, our son needs to be more masculine.
I would hope that the person that I end up having children with isn't as rigid in their thinking. But suppose that does happen. I mean, not all masculinity is bad, right?
True.
So there's definitely aspects of masculinity that are beneficial, and not just only to the man child, but also to the girl child. And I think there's aspects of masculinity that the girl child could learn. But in that situation, I would hope that I'll be able to listen to her and understand where she's coming from and what it is that she's trying to teach the child. So it's a matter of what's the lesson, not the behavior. So I'd hopefully try and get to a point where we understand what are you trying to teach the child, what character, what virtue are you trying to give the child that comes from the idea of masculinity? Because you don't want the child to end up with a set of behaviors that are then branded toxic masculinity. Rather, you can give them an idea of what it is that is trying to be defined by those behaviors, or is trying to be expressed by those behaviors. So if it's to do with the way they carry themselves, or if it's to do with ideas of them being more of an aggressive man, I would hope, that maybe she's trying to talk about power and strength, and realizing that you can still be a powerful man, you can still be a strong man who isn't aggressive. You don't have to have the loudest voice or the angriest voice for you to be heard. I would like to hope that we would be able to sit down and have a conversation about it and come to a point where we both agree on how best to allow our child to express themselves.
No, I hear you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I guess also it's important just to mention that this doesn't only happen in the context of heterosexual relationships, right? It could happen
Yeah.
in the context of queer relationships where,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
for queer people, um, one may understand a different brand of masculinity as opposed to someone else.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just
Yeah.
about how people want to raise their children and what lessons we can learn from them raising their children. And
Yeah.
again, it's a collaborative thing. So I like what you're saying about like,
Yeah.
what is the lesson? You know, you don't want to just ban behaviors if there is no lesson. So let's look
Yeah.
at what the underlying lesson is before we take drastic measures to
Yeah.
make these mistakes. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. Yeah, just the idea of thinking that let's be careful to just brand everything as toxic masculinity, and then let's really look at what the underlying lessons are, and what we can learn from this. So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I mean, now we can turn to, romantic relationships. I particularly like this poem where you say, and I want to know where it's coming from because, like, it spoke to me in so many ways. You say, I've sought to make homes in places my soul was uncomfortable. It said, here we will not survive. Leave and find better. But often I was stubborn. Often I made excuses for love that was short. And that like speaks about romantic relationships, but it also speaks about friendships. And I wanted to know like what was the inspiration behind writing this poem.
Oh God. I mean, it definitely came from the experience of being in past relationships where, and yeah, like you said, romantic relationships where I felt like I wasn't listening to myself. So I wasn't listening to my being. I wasn't listening to my soul. And, that comes from the ideas that we take upon, the ideas that we listen to, the ideas that we see, that become our experience of what love and romantic love should be. So in doing so, you then put upon yourself all these burdens of what to expect, and from yourself and also from the other person. And in trying to execute all these ideas, your soul tells you get these signals from your being that this is right and this is not right. But often we're stubborn because we love the other person, or we have an idea of what we think loving the other person is, or an idea of what it is to be loved by another person, even if it makes us uncomfortable, even if it burns us, we still stay, in some of these relationships, in some of these places. And that's how you make excuses for love that's short, because it's love that doesn't see you. It's love that doesn't listen to you. It's love that doesn't embrace all of you. And I mean, it was part of I suppose looking back, it's part of a journey to get me to where I am, to get me to understand that all of your past experiences, all of the loves that you have or you have had, all of the lovers that you have had, make you a better lover after you leave, So, I mean, it definitely did come from a place of staying in what I would call like a trying place, in places where you feel like, okay, I don't like how I'm forcing myself to express my love, or how I'm forcing myself to even express the idea of what I think love is.
Yeah, no. And I mean, here in another poem, you're talking about within me a strong, vivid vision, thunderous, rhythmic words pounding, love is speaking, truth is in me, its impulse is in me, and I'm rooted in it, reminding me we do not always get to choose our soulmates. I mean, how deeply profound is that? And also just the idea that sometimes we construct the idea of soulmates to be romantic relationships, but sometimes I find that in my own understanding of what love means is that your soulmate does not necessarily have to be someone that you're romantically involved with. What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, no, I definitely agree with the sentiment, and I think it's true. I think it's definitely true. I think I've definitely encountered soulmates who were people I wasn't romantically involved with, and And I think often the trick or the lie of society is to trick us into thinking that we should be romantically involved with those people, you know. And you come to realize that no, there are these people that you will come across on your journey through life, and they'll leave a lasting impression on you, and you'll make lasting impressions on each other. And it doesn't have to be romantic. It could literally be one of the most beautiful relationships that you'll have with another human being on this earth. And I think, like, in writing that, maybe that's somewhat like it came from that idea, in realizing that there are people that I've met and people that I'm sharing my life with, and they are my soulmates, and they're nothing more than that and nothing less than.
Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because in some ways, these people who are our soulmates or who we are so close with, like, you hope in some instances, at least in my case, that you do end up, you know, being in romantic relationships with these people, because I'm like, you're amazing. Like, I deserve to be in a relationship with you because you're amazing. Like, how can we just be friends? No, like, let's be in a relationship.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But I guess sometimes, you know, I don't know if I agree so much with this, but, you know, when people are like, but sometimes you're better as friends as you are as lovers, I'm like, no. Like, we haven't been lovers, so we don't know if we're going to be good or not because we haven't been lovers.
Yeah, but what are lovers then?
I mean, I guess I've been thinking a lot about, like, the idea of, like, polyamorous non-sexual relationships. So that there are certain people that you are intimate with, although you're not sexual with, right? And those people you are in relations with, right? But I guess lovers is something, how we've described, like, love and relationships has to deal with, like, a sexual element. Like, the person that you're dating, you're supposed to be intimate in a sexual way with them. But I'm wondering if, like, you can be in relations with people without necessarily having to be sexually intimate with them.
I mean, well, for myself, because like you, I've been, you know, I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about this, and I've come to a point where I've kind of come up with my own definitions, or maybe perhaps I've heard it from somewhere and thought about it. And I think the conflict comes from trying to own one another, you know, and sexual relationships. I think from the way that we've experienced them in this time period that we've lived in as human beings, they've pretty much been about owning the other person. You know, if I'm having sex with you, you're my person, and it's really difficult to go beyond that, but I've given it to myself as a challenge. So to the point of having this beautiful relationship with another human being, and it not having to become anything more than friendship. So like you said, lovers, which is why I asked what are lovers. And in most cases, I think people have the idea of, if we're friends, we're not being sexually intimate with each other. But if we're lovers, then sex is expected, or sex becomes part of the relationship. And it's this idea that, okay, sex is a beautiful thing. Sex is a beautiful thing to experience with someone who you have a deep emotional connection with. But it's also possible to have this deep, beautiful relationship with a person, with another human being, without sex being involved in it. You know, I mean, sex definitely, like, it magnifies it, and it makes it intense, and it makes it beautiful. It adds another dimension to it, but it's not everything, if that makes sense.
I mean, I agree with you. I think I'm one of those people who are like, I desire emotional intimacy with people more than I necessarily desire sexual intimacy. There is nothing for me that is as beautiful as knowing that, you know, when something happens in your life, I'm the first person that you think about. Like, if something small happens, something big happens. Like, for me, that type of intimacy is something that that I really appreciate.
Okay.
And that doesn't necessarily come with the fact that, oh my gosh, I'm feeling you. I mean, I'm realizing that sex is important, but in my eyes, it's just like the deep emotional connection is something that I value over sex.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
But I mean,
I
we're
hear you.
human beings, you know.
Yeah, I know. See, that's the thing, and I definitely agree. We are human beings, and expressing ourselves sexually with another person is, like I said, it adds a different dimension to the relationship. It's. I mean, when sex is done right, it's really beautiful, and when it's done with the person that.
Hold up. Perhaps I haven't been doing sex right. What do you mean when sex is done right? It seems you need to be giving us tutorials about what it is we should be doing for us to fully get out of it what we deserve.
God. So when you're able to express what it is that you're feeling for this other human being, and they're able to understand that whilst you're having sex, and you're able to almost like listening. I see sex as listening. It's a part of listening, but you're listening to other person's body, if that makes sense.
I mean, I agree with you. I think that in some instances, the idea of knowing how another person's body react to yours, like, is part of that intimacy. I think that if you are, and this is why I believe if you are deeply connected with someone emotionally, like when you are sexually intimate, like there is a way in which the cells of your body speak to each other.
I definitely agree with that.
So yes, before this podcast turns into a sex episode, let's move right along. I think one of the I mean, I'm interested to know why you started writing. Like, what prompted you to start writing?
Oh God, it was because I've been thinking about this, and I almost feel like I've always had the idea that I wanted to be a writer. And I've always written. But earlier in my life, it was I wrote for myself. I never wrote to share with other people. So I would before like mobile phones, I would constantly keep a notepad on me, and I would always be seen scribbling something into my notepad. And whether it's just an idea, whether it's a phrase, or whether it's a sentence, or whether it's a whole block of words, I was always writing.
And I mean, so who are some of like the people that influence you? Like, who are some of the people that you continuously go back to when you need inspiration? Or some of the people that like, we all have those writers that we always go back to. They're like our sounding board.
Yeah. I mean, part of what got me to writing my book Zimbabwe was I was blessed to interact with Yrsa Daley-Ward and Nayyirah Waheed. And that experience was just another world in itself. So definitely those two. And I love Juno Diaz. Absolutely love Juno Diaz. And J.R. Tolkien. As well as Haruki Murakami and Alice Walker. Yeah. And Khaled Hosseini. I absolutely love writing too. And there's a writer from Birmingham called Mike Gale. And I absolutely love his books as well.
And I mean, I'm interested to know how you have been slaying with these black women, right? So, like, how you came to interact with Nayyirah and Yrsa, and how that experience was in shaping Zimbabwe.
That was through because we met and interacted with each other from Tumblr, and this is a few years ago. So we were both writing on Tumblr, and that's how we got to meet with each other. And in terms of shaping Zimbabwe, because they're amazing writers, right? So it was literally sitting there and soaking up what jewels and what wisdom they gave me, in helping me shape my own book.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 poems in Zimbabwe that you've written in Shona. Is there a reason for this?
Yeah, definitely. It was part of it was because my book is called Zimbabwe, and because I identify as a Shona, so it was almost quite embarrassing to write this book that's called Zimbabwe that is about being Zimbabwean, and there aren't any Shona poems in them. And it's a shame. At the time, my Ndebele wasn't as good, but I would have loved to put Ndebele poems in the book as well, because those languages are what make us Zimbabwean first before the English language. So in terms of just speaking your language, because I have this really strong idea that we can only express ourselves through our languages, and until you're properly fluent or you think in your own language, you can't be your own self. And so that was part of the reason in putting those poems in the book.
Do you think in Shona or in Ndebele?
I definitely don't think in Ndebele. I think half in Shona and half in English.
If I were to wake you up like in the middle of the night, like which language would come out?
It would depend on how you woke me up.
Like, let's just say it was like a frightened awakening.
I mean, if you startled me, yes, I would definitely wake up in Shona.
That's good.
Yeah,
that's good.
When I'm afraid, I think when I'm forced to be primal, I think in Shona.
Primal. I mean, it's interesting because I remember this one incident where I was having like a really bad tummy ache, and like I just started like praying in Setswana, and I was like, yeah, actually, you know what? Nope, my Setswana is here. My Setswana is here. Because normally, because I believe that I think in English. I feel like I've spent a lot of time being insulated in the institution of English, that I actually think in English, and I find that in some ways I express myself better in English. But I do appreciate my home language, and I do appreciate like what it gives me. Like there are certain things that I can only say in Setswana that I can't say in English. So I appreciate that.
Oh, that's amazing.
I mean, it must be the same.
Amazing, by the way.
It must be the same with like Shona. There's just like, there's a word in Shona, right? That isn't in English. It's just like it doesn't translate as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And with the poems that I did put in the book, trying to translate them into English was really difficult.
So what was interesting for me is that before I read them, before I raided the internet to get to a Tumblr where the translation was, I called one of my Shona friends and I was like, "Can you translate this for me?" And we translated this, and she said, "This is what it means." And then I went to the Tumblr, which was your translation, and then I was like, and then we spoke about that translation, and then she's like, "You see, this is the thinness of English, right? Like it's sort of near, but it's not exactly what you would have intended it to be had it just been in Shona."
Yeah. I agree, because when I translated the poems, I found myself almost having to almost having to remodel the words so that they fit in English, or trying to find a near version of the word in English so that it kind of expresses what I was trying to say.
No, I hear you. One of my favorite poems in the book is this poem where you say, You don't realize how uncomfortable your first language sits in your mouth until the day you learn how colonization was a pedophile who insists on being a parent. So when it's pointed out, you deny it. When you were wild with young life, you denied it. Forgive yourself. Those waters were sharp. Today, learn how to mother language that builds conal towers. Relearn words that clumsily slipped out of you. Grow a spine out of your mouth. I mean, the imagery in this poem is absolutely beautiful for me. And I mean, in talking about language now, I wanted to know if, like, you wanting to, think in Shona, you wrote this poem from that perspective.
Yeah, first, thank you. And yeah, definitely. It was the idea that I would love to think in my own language, because colonization has done this thing where first it took out our languages from our mouths, and then generations later it laughed at us when we couldn't speak the language of the colonizer, or when we couldn't express ourselves properly using like English, or whether it's Portuguese or whether it's Spanish, right? And then when you then try and use your own language, you'll find that you're almost shut down. So I read a paper a few years ago, and I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Kwame Nkrumah or what's this writer's name? I can't remember his name. He's a Kenyan author though.
Ngugi.
And Ngugi. I think it was Ngugi. And he said something about how at the African Union we speak in English and in French. So it was this idea that how can we still be using the colonizer's language when expressing ourselves? And I mean, it works, but I also wrote that poem from an angry place because unfortunately racist people use the idea that until a person can express themselves in their own language, because language is how, like I said, language is how you think, and language is where ideas come from. So if your ideas are coming from the English language, your ideas can be claimed as English. So it's almost like you can't be truly, it's almost like a utopian idea of wanting to have ideas that are purely African, and those ideas have to start from where we conceptualize those ideas in our own language. So for one of my dream goals is to have maths taught in Shona and Daley within Zimbabwe, to the point where we teach like the sciences and the economics, and God, I would love to see astrophysics taught in Shona. Just the idea of where do we come from and what is the universe being taught in your own mother tongue. I think it brings out more ideas. Like, for example, I was speaking with my sister about this idea of our grandmothers and our past and our forefathers discussing the origins of the universe in our own language and what ideas we would come up with. And I think those ideas would be far more richer than the ideas that we come about with in a foreigner's language. And I only say this to counterpoint the racist ideas of us being inferior to our colonizers because we don't use our own languages to come up with ideas. So that's where that came from.
But do you think that, I mean, I was listening to one of the earlier conversations we had with another poet. Her name is Ashley Makwe. She wrote a book called I Know How to Fix Myself. But
Sure,
and I'm
yeah.
just reading this poem, I'm thinking about like how in writing this poem I can hear the Shona, like your ability to write in this language is colored by your Shona. When you say grow a spine out of your mouth, right? It's just I feel like in some ways it's colored with Shona. Like English is so dull that we had to come and beautify it and make it pretty. And we could only have done that because we have like some idea and we speak our language. We may not be necessarily fluent in our languages, but we speak it and we've used that to influence our writing.
That's true, actually. Yeah, I agree with you.
I mean,
and I think
yeah,
that came from, like you said earlier on, in thinking in Shona. So that was probably a part of me that thought of that line in Shona.
because it's also interesting like this. I love because it reminds me of myself when you're like, you were wild with young life, you denied it. How people always used to accuse us to be like, oh, you don't speak proper Setswana, whatever that may mean, right? Because I mean, the project of colonization is to have ripped me out of Setswana, right? In some ways, like I'm grateful for my parents who continuously made sure we spoke Setswana in my home, even though we didn't speak. But I mean, nowadays, the teachers, you send your children to school and the teachers are like, please speak English at home. We don't want the child to not understand English. So like colonization continues to steal because now you can't even teach your children your home language at home because the parents are uncomfortable about how English rolls out of their tongue.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, I had never heard of that. That is quite bold.
I mean, it's literally happened where people are like, no, you can't speak any vernac at home because your child's tongue is too, Nolwazi, she says, I'm embarrassed about, she was talking about the poem and about like language, and her first language is isiZulu, and she was talking about like how she used to be embarrassed when English came out of her sister's mouth in isiZulu. Because it's not as smooth, it doesn't sound as good, and what schools do nowadays is they're just like, well, instead of having this problem, let's just all speak English, which is
and I mean that's the work of colonization. I mean, it's an ugly thing. It's such an ugly thing, It's
colonization makes me really angry, because I mean, the fact that we are, two Africans communicating in the colonizer's language, speaks about like how we were segregated, because if we didn't have any borders, I would be able to speak Shona, you'd be able to speak Setswana, or even we would be able to understand each other even if you were speaking in your mother tongue and I was speaking in my mother tongue.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
And I'm wondering, how does decolonization look like for you as a writer, as someone who's passionate about learning, or wanting your children to be taught astrophysics in Shona? Like how does colonization look like to you? Decolonization, sorry, not colonization, decolonization.
No, it's a tough process. Like, it's a really tough process of stripping down, So you're constantly stripping down and rebuilding, and you're constantly finding out things that break your heart, and then accepting that those things are, and sometimes they can't be remedied, but sometimes they are. And part of decolonization is being aware. So first, like for me, it's being aware, and that's the most beautiful part. Just being aware that certain things were stolen from me, and I'm not able to be the person that I would have been had history not happened in a certain way, So for me, decolonization has been first learning like as much of history as I can from both sides, So from the colonizer's point of view, and from our point of view, and as well as learning what colonization looked like for other peoples within like the planet, within the planet Earth. Like, what did they go through? What was it like for them? And realizing that we almost have like this similar story. And from then on, it's discovering that in as much was taken from me in the killing and in the killing of my ancestors and in the things that were stolen from us, I am here, and the memories of my ancestors are somehow preserved within me, right? So it's this idea from biology of knowing that I'm a product of my ancestors, and within my DNA is code of what my ancestors were. So I have my father's brown eyes. I have my mother's features, and within that I also have. And maybe it's a fantastical idea, but within that I have the ideas of my ancestors as well, and those ideas might not be as easily accessible as a thoughts, but they exist within me in my ambition. So for me, like, decolonization carries on through that, and it becomes my job to continue to be decolonized in trying to attain excellency in everything I do. And that's part of me decolonizing myself and saying to the colonizer, look, this is an African child writing the most amazing book that could ever exist, and it's from a Zimbabwean mind, an African mind. I created that, and it carries on into the ideas that we have. So whatever ideas we have as Black people, as African people, as people of color, it's the execution and the fulfillment of those ideas, and owning those ideas as our ideas, and saying, even though a part of my generation was killed because of colonization, even though a chunk of my own language is missing from my vocabulary, I am still able to do all of these amazing things, to create all of these amazing things, to come up with all these amazing ideas, and to execute them, and to see them come to fulfillment, and to own them as African people, as people of color, and say, we did this. And for me, that's decolonization. It's not just a process of being aware of what happened in the past. That's all memory, but it's what we do with what we are now that takes decolonization to another step, to a point where hopefully one day we can say, you know what, we are truly decolonized. We all we have is memory of what happened to our ancestors, but that hasn't continued. We put a stop to it. We own our ideas. We own who we are. We haven't had other people's ideas imposed on us, and that hasn't become our way of life. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm just wondering, thinking about decolonization, like, I think an important element of decolonization is decolonizing Black masculinity in particular. And I'm thinking about it in the context of, like, I mean, in the last year, like, what has been happening in South Africa is, like, women have been killed, at the hands of men, particularly in domestic, intimate partner violence, right? And as well as, like, women, just like queer Black women have been killed in South Africa. And I wanted to know, like, if you, were to be president for one day, or were to have the opportunity to bring a group of men to speak about issues that affect men and how they are supposed to relate to women, actually, and relate to people in society as a whole. Like, what are some of the things that you would say to them, particularly in the wave of, #MeToo, #TimeUp, like, just this global imagination of, like, how masculinity and patriarchy and misogyny has, like, pillaged and subjugated and continues to rape women?
I think, oh dear, how can I say this? So initially what you want to do is obviously acknowledge that this is happening. Acknowledge that this has happened. Acknowledge that this is happening, that this is a real thing, that this is a truth. It's a truth. It's not an accusation. It's not a false accusation. It's not a delusion. It's actual real life, and this is another human being's experience, right? So you take life as this thing that we're going through that we don't get another second chance of, and you accept that another human being isn't getting to experience life as freely as you are, because they identify as female, or because of however they identify themselves. So it's first acknowledging that this is happening, and then getting men to speak to speak, and almost to hear their truth, to let them tell the truth of why they have behaved in such a way.
I mean, I think we I'm laughing because this is constant conversations that I'm having. I think sometimes we think that men want to tell the truth. What if they don't want to tell the truth?
Well, if they don't want to tell the truth, well, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to come to a resolution, because if they don't want to tell the truth, they're in denial of what's actually happening. And as long as they're in denial about what's happening, unfortunately, the issue can't be remedied. Women are going to carry on speaking. Transgender people are going to carry on speaking, and no one's going to listen to them, because, like I said, this is a truth. It's not a delusion. It's not a falsehood. It's a real thing. And as long as the other side deny it, then what's happening is you're denying someone else of their human experience.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean,
so
I guess we also spoke about this at the beginning, because, obviously you are now living in the UK from Zimbabwe. There's a poem where called "This is How I Survived Countries That Didn't Want Me." Is it possible to recite that for us as well?
Yeah, sure. Just give me a minute. Okay. This is how I survived countries that didn't want me. I hid behind curtains, locked doors, and in silence. No matter how beautiful I was, I never made myself visible, too afraid their eyes will know me to death. I unlearned how to laugh. Flowers and gardens can make any foreign soil feel like home, so I dug with hand, planted like my life depended on it, and it did. I buried my ancestors under my feet, in dust, under my clothes, where no one was looking. I spoke as little as possible. My accents, no matter how I shaped my words, defined me. I learned how to cook. I traveled in the meals I made. I packed parts of me away for when I went back home. I forgot how to kneel before my grandmother when I greeted her. I never said where I was from, but my name betrayed me, so I denied it. My name was a gun. My country's history was mine to explain, and its ugly parts became my only story, the only story they'd listen to. I reminded myself I was not a thief. I was not hoarding passport stamps. I drank the bile of countries that hated me and turned into their rage.
This is quite an intense poem as well. Are there any experiences that informed writing this piece? I mean, apart obviously from being black in just the world.
I mean, it was definitely again, this is memory. So it was the experience of living in a country where you're obviously visible, like you said, you're black. But then England isn't, that predominantly white. They are black people, but it was being visible amongst other black people as being alien. And that happened, for instance, so in my name, which is fair enough, because of Zimbabwe's history and because it is a name that belongs to a famous person. So questions would have been asked, but what you then found was I became, or my experience, or I became Robert Mugabe, and everything then became Robert Mugabe. So it was like, okay, I'm not going to mention my name.
So you are not related to Uncle Bob?
No,
Okay.
I'm not. No, I am not.
I hear you. Just so everyone knows, Tapiwa Mugabe is not related to Uncle Bob.
Oh gosh, if I had $1 for every time that question was asked. And I mean, it was, what else can I say from this? It was definitely the experience of, sorry?
No,
it was definitely the experience of being in a place where you felt unwanted, you know, where you felt like you were encroaching on someone else's territory. And I feel, I mean, to an extent, maybe we are, you know, but it's a complicated subject, you know, it's a complicated subject, but it definitely became a thing of survival. Like, okay, this is where I've made home, and how am I going to survive living in this place? What can I do that reminds me of who I am? Even though you don't want me, I am still going to carry on being who I am. And even though much of it was done in trying to keep trying to keep like the memory of who I am or where I come from alive, it was almost like partly defiance as well.
Yeah.
You know, to say, so you don't want me, you don't want to see me. Well, guess what? I am going to carry on, and I'm going to do it quite more intensely than before to express myself, just so I can retain who I am, and just so I can, you know, be myself in your face.
I mean, for me, what was really striking is when you said, I spoke as little as possible. My accent, no matter how I shaped my words, defined me. I learned how to cook. I traveled in the meals I made. For me, it's been interesting, you know, being in America, because it seems the world only has two countries. It's either the US or England. Because every time I speak, someone's like, oh, are you from England? I'm like, firstly, no. Because I don't sound English. Like, have you heard the people in England? I don't sound like them. And it has made me realize, like, how, like, you know, the global north, like, really doesn't have a conception of anything outside of, like, the places that they're familiar with. You know, like, there's a whole continent of people, and it seems like this whole continent of people don't speak proper English. Like, people don't imagine that you could be from Africa and you can speak English. You know, people are just confused, and that's been a big challenge for me here. It's just like, honestly, people, there are other countries in the world, lots of other countries, and they speak English. So I'm not from England. Not to say that English is a bad thing. I'm just not from England. Like, I'm from South Africa. I'm from southern parts of Africa. I'm an African.
Yeah.
What is next for Tapiwa?
Well, more books.
Yes. Okay. When are we having another podcast about another book? Like, when is this happening? Is it in the horizon? Should we, like, start getting our monies ready?
I mean, hopefully soon. Hopefully soon. I have been working on a few things. You know, not to give anything away, but
Yeah.
you know, just keep your ears open. And beyond that, I've been working with another writer. Her name is Tasonda. She's from Zimbabwe, and we're coming up with an anthology of poetry and writing and some artwork that's to do with being Zimbabwe, and it's titled Our Voices. So it's trying to give trying to amplify Zimbabwean voices and hearing what other Zimbabweans define themselves as, how they define their Zimbabweanness. So there's in the works, and that I can speak about.
I think it's really interesting, because like when we talk about Zimbabwe, like you said, it was, as you say in the poem, it's like your history. My country's history was mine to explain, and its ugly parts became my only story. And I think your voice is trying to push against that narrative, right? That there is so much more to Zimbabwe than just the so-called Chengorenga, or so there's so much more to Zimbabwe than Robert Bob Mugabe. There is a whole country with people of diverse views, of diverse sexuality, of diverse histories. So I think it's really important to have stories coming out of Africa to change the narratives about like certain parts of Africa, because it seems like Zimbabwe might just be known as a conflict zone. But there are wonderful writers that come from Zimbabwe. There are wonderful creators that come from Zimbabwe, like wonderful thinkers that come from Zimbabwe.
Yeah. I mean, Zimbabwe is a beautiful country, and not just in terms of its geography, in terms of the people, and whether you're talking about the Ndebele people, or the Shona people, or the Ndau, or the Manyikas, it's like this kaleidoscope of all these human beings and their experiences, their stories that they have to tell, the ideas that they have are all really what make us Zimbabwean, and they're all just really amazing. And I look forward to to seeing Zimbabwe's journey into the future, more so what's happened in the past. I'm really optimistic about Zimbabwe's future, and I'm really excited about it. So,
does this mean you would move to Zimbabwe?
Yes, I would. Okay. Yes, I would. I mean, in the future, I would.
Okay.
In the future, I would, and obviously, I would move back to help build the country. I have my own ideas of what I would like to see Zimbabwe become. So yeah, I definitely would move back to Zimbabwe to help it become a better country than it is now, and to see it fulfill like part of its potential, hopefully within my lifetime. And in my lifetime, hopefully, I don't know when, to see some of the ideas that I've heard Zimbabweans speak about, or the ideas that I have, or the ideas that, we've all had in our heads, to see some of those things come to pass.
No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I think, that's also something that a lot of people have been asking me while I've been here. It's like, are you staying? I'm like, I want to go build my country. I want to go back to my country. Like, why do we keep leaving our countries, And I mean, there are a number of reasons. Like, I'm not trying to throw jabs at people who have not gone back home. It's basically like we have our own, like, our own dreams, our own passions, and our own alignments. And certain people are bolding maybe to go back later on and build the country when they feel they've got a lot of what they needed to get out of, the global north. And so have you so we definitely getting more books from you, which is amazing, because I think that your writing does an interesting thing for masculinity, right? Every time someone asks me, who are your favorite poets, I'm like, Tapiwa, Zimbabwe, just like get Zimbabwe, because I think like it's also this idea of challenging what even the term unmanly looks like. Like for me, I'm always thinking about like the idea that masculinity is so fragile that it's the only thing that can be unsomething. Like nobody says you are unfeminine or unwoman. Like womanhood is so solid in itself that you don't un it. But with masculinity, it's so fragile that you are effeminate, you are unmanly. There are just these lots of things that you can do for this masculinity. Like there's like a criteria. So I think like for me, what's been so important about your book is just like this commentary on masculinity and what we understand masculinity to be. and that softness is actually a part of masculinity, and how we as the generation of men can start understanding our masculinity, which doesn't take away anything from our masculinity, you know.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you for that. Thank you for, and also for writing about love in the way that you write about love. I think there, you know, some poems here that I return to, and I'm like, yeah, you know, love is short, not for a short love. Always remember. I mean, it's not always easy, you know, but thank you for that, and even the relationship that you write about, like with your parents and your sister. Just it's in some ways it's like an ode to Black women, and in other ways it's like a teaching of masculinity, and in some ways it's like a jab to the colonizer, and to also finding your place. I think like it speaks about also finding your place in the world as a Zimbabwean living in the UK.
Yeah. I couldn't have put it better myself.
Just navigating these spaces. So, and it seems in some ways, you know, we don't want to think this of poetry, but some ways it's autobiographical. You know, it's the story of your life through poetry, as opposed to a memoir. Or are we?
Yeah.
Can we expect a memoir from you? A tell-all. Tell-all.
Not now. I'm way too young to be writing a memoir about myself.
What does that mean, though? Like, you could be, because I've been thinking a lot about this, like, at what age is the appropriate time to write a memoir? And I'm like, is there an age? Like, what if you feel like you've lived enough right now, and you have enough stories to tell about your life?
You could. I mean, personally, I wouldn't. I know I wouldn't be happy with it. I wouldn't be happy with it because I still feel like, just as a human being, I mean, obviously you don't know when this experience ends. So you can't, like you said, you can't then say, oh, I'll write it at a certain time. So any time is good enough to write your memoir. But for myself, I feel like I would be better off leaving it for a later stage in my life when I think I'm a little bit more wiser.
No, I hear you. I definitely hear you. I wanted to find out, like, where do I mean, I know where to get it, but like, where can our listeners get a copy of Zimbabwe?
So you can get it from Amazon, as well as the Kindle version. So you can get it from Amazon Kindle, from the Amazon Kindle app, and you can get it from CreateSpace, which is createspace.com. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, and how do we, when we want to follow your work, where can we get a hold of you on social media? Do you have social media, and what are your handles?
So on Instagram, I'm Tapiwa Mugabe, and on Twitter, I'm at Tapiwa Mugabe1, and I've got a Tumblr, which is Tapiwa Mugabe, and that's all on my social network. That's all my social network presence.
No, thank you very much, Tapiwa, for joining me on this episode of The Cheeky Natives. I thought it was a great conversation about, like, just what it means to be a man, what it means to be, in particular, an African man, you know, in this global imagination. Something that we do here at The Cheeky Natives is, like, we give people land, because, you know, when the revolution comes and when the land comes, we will pass you a title deed. So that you can enjoy your title deed. I mean, I'm not familiar with, like, the UK or Zimbabwe, but where are what would you like? Which piece of land would you like, and where would you like it, so we can bestow it upon you as the Cheeky Natives?
Oh my gosh. Where? Either Zimbabwe or England or South Africa or anywhere on that.
Wherever you would like land, where would you like some land?
Wherever I'd like some land. Wow. I would want a few hectares on Mars, Elon Musk, you know. When you get there, I want a few hectares in my name.
I mean, if we can get to Mars, we can definitely do that, you know. We can definitely give you a few hectares in Mars.
Please. I don't know how Zimbabweans would feel about another Mugabe taking land in Zimbabwe, so...
That is true, because I've been thinking about, like, the whole idea that, you know, like, the land has already been, I want to say, expropriated. And, you know, people want their land. So, like, we can't be giving another Mugabe land.
Zimbabwe, just no, don't do it. Don't do it. Oh my gosh. I'd like some land in Fiji.
Okay. Fiji?
Yeah,
Fiji?
Fiji or the Maldives.
Oh, okay, fancy.
Oh my gosh. And maybe somewhere in the Congo. I'd
Okay.
love to live in the Congo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone. So thank you for tuning in on this episode of the Cheeky Natives. I've been in conversation with the incredibly amazing Tapiwa Mugabe, the author of Zimbabwe, which is a collection of poetry which speaks about family, masculinity, love, colonization, nostalgia about the country, and just basically a black man story trying to find himself and navigate the world in whatever facets it may be. Thank you very much, Tapiwa, for joining us on this episode of the Cheeky Natives. We look forward to reading more of your work. And we as the Cheeky Natives, give you land in the Maldives. And we hope that one day you can claim that title deed and enjoy the Maldives.
Oh, thanks a lot for having me. It
All
was a
right.
pleasure to be in conversation with you.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.